You are listening to the serialized audiobook podcast for Blood of the Stars, an epic fantasy novel written by Karyne Norton, read by Paeter Frandsen and Karyne Norton. If you can't wait to listen to the whole audiobook, or if you want a signed physical copy, go to karynnorton.com/shop to get the lowest cost by buying direct. You can also find the audiobook on Audible, Barnes & Noble, and other standard retailers. Please enjoy the next installment of Blood of the Stars by Karyne Norton. Chapter 6. How exactly is this helping me become a priestess? Eliana spun in a half circle, wrestling to pull the bow from its sling on her back. Cyrus laughed and helped her retrieve it. Servants of the stars still need to eat. Gams and Gamps will likely spend more time teaching us how to bake and garden rather than have us reading the holy books or meditating on the star's light. He pulled an arrow from her quiver, passing it over with the ease of familiarity. Besides, many times while out on a hunt, I've had my deepest conversations with the stars, alone amidst all they've created. He scanned the surrounding forest, and Eliana followed his gaze, taking in the trickling brook at their feet and the pine trees blocking the stargazer. Her guardians were probably camped somewhere out here, waiting, watching for her. She couldn't imagine coming out here alone to find peace. You have a distinct advantage, having been raised to this from childhood. Eliana thought of her own childhood, being carted from town to town while her guardians sought the golden arrow, fending for herself like a street rat most days, until they tested her blood and her magic showed. For the last 4 years, she'd been more of a prisoner, a daily source of power they weren't willing to give up. Eliana adjusted the arm guard before knocking the arrow the way he'd shown her earlier that morning. Her shoulders resisted, her agitation at an all-time high. It had been a week since she'd replaced Celeste, and she sensed her body fighting to release its power, making her head ache and her muscles tense. It's not a competition. Cyrus adjusted her grip on her bow. There, now aim for the tree across the water. He pointed at a tree a dozen feet away. She emptied her quiver with only a single arrow grazing the tree. As she and Cyrus bent to gather the fallen arrows, Eliana let out a sigh of frustration. You're trying too hard. Relax and enjoy the morning. Don't worry about hitting the tree. He handed her several arrows. She shoved them into her quiver with a short laugh. How am I supposed to aim for the tree and not think about hitting it? Aim for the tree, then close your eyes and imagine it striking the wood, right at its center. But don't look to see if you made it. We're practicing form today. I don't expect you to hit targets yet. She frowned at the bow and arrow in her hands. After 7 days, she had nothing to show for her efforts except the added stress of hiding the magic building in her blood. She'd searched the unlocked stargazer storerooms when it was her turn for private prayer, then the stables and even the refuse piles during the night. Now, instead of hunting for the golden arrow, she was shooting cedar ones. When Cyrus gestured for her to try again, she sighed, then pulled the string taut and anchored her hand at her cheek. Her fingers and arms burned from the repetitive motions, and she let the arrow fly before she'd had a chance to truly aim. It barely cleared the brook. She knocked another arrow, avoiding Cyrus's eyes. Della said we get shipments of artifacts. Find anything interesting so far? She held her breath while waiting for his response, and found her arms steadier, her aim truer. Sure enough, when she released that arrow, it bounced off the tree. Cyrus jumped from his rock and clapped for her, like she'd just won a tournament. It didn't even stick, she mumbled. Doesn't matter, he grinned. You just need more energy behind it, and that will come with time. The stronger your arms get, the more force you can put behind it. He sat back on his rock, crossing a foot over the opposite knee. And yes, the artifacts are always interesting, especially the books and weapons. She dropped an arrow in her relief. She bent to grab it, going through the motions of aiming again, the strain on her muscles worth it to keep him talking. Not that he needed much encouragement. The harder part would be ensuring he didn't tell Della or Bartholomew about all her questions. He nodded his long red hair at the nape of his neck, then grabbed his own bow and arrow. When he stood beside her, he took aim for the same tree. It's sad how many stargazers are closing, though. His shot stuck in the center, mocking all the arrows Eliana had left littered at the tree's base. He jumped across the brook to gather them up. Training under gams and gamps has made me see how little regard people have for the stars. It's made my faith stronger, which is probably good, since I was always destined to be a priest. I think you and I are meant to bring about a revival in our generation. Eliana's guilt bloomed, spreading and swirling in her chest. He'd already latched onto her like a leech, not knowing her blood was poison. She tried not to think about the danger she was putting him in. The closer they became, the more likely he'd get hurt. Even if they didn't get close, what would happen to the people here if she left Arvid and Vera behind? They had stores of her blood hidden away, and they wouldn't be afraid to use it. She squared her shoulders and clenched her jaw. Removing herself and her blood from Arvid and Vera would save countless others. And if she could reach Vendaris, surely there would be another half-light who could teach her how to rid her blood of its magic. She had to find the arrow, and she had to leave. Why were you destined to be a priest? She asked as Cyrus hopped back across the brook. I have 6 younger sisters, 2 older sisters, and 2 older brothers. My oldest brother inherits my father's land, but the next one became a sailor, which left me or my sisters to take over the Stargazer. Cyrus handed the arrows to Eliana. She took a deep breath, aiming for the tree once more. This time she closed her eyes like he'd suggested. The loss of vision encouraged her other senses to take over. Crisp mountain air with fresh pine scent flooded every breath. Birds twittered, and trees creaked. Warmth surged through Eliana's veins as she imagined the arrow hitting the tree's center. She willed her energy to pass through the arrow, giving it the force to stick. She let the arrow fly, and Cyrus gasped. You did it! He slapped her back the way she'd seen children do in the market, excited over a shared toy. Did you not expect me to? Not on the first day. Do it again. She hit the tree 5 more times in quick succession, each time giving herself over to the senses flooding her mind and the will to prove herself. When she turned to see Cyrus's reaction, his jaw hung open, but his freckled brow bunched in confusion. Her gut tightened. Her success hadn't been normal, which meant she'd done magic. She hadn't meant to, hadn't even realized that was what she'd been doing. She scanned the skies for dark spirits, even though she was almost certain they came for the blood, not the magic. But the power that had swelled within her left her breathless with need, her body and mind warring over how much harm her magic could really do, but also how much better she might feel if she gave in to the desire to use it. She gritted her teeth, digging the bow's lower limb into the soil where newly grown blades of grass poked through the earth, evidence of her crime. She glanced back toward the stargazer's wall where an unmarked grave lay. She was unwilling to forget the price. Beginner's luck, huh? Her words came out strained. You don't have to pretend to be new at this. Cyrus's brow lowered, his confusion giving way to disappointment. I won't hold it against you if you're better than me. I'm not pretending. She bit her lip, wishing she could bite back her words. It would have been easier to let him believe the lie. Then how did you do that? He didn't wait for an answer. There, see the squirrel in the tree? Eliana followed his pointing finger, her heart sinking as the tiny creature settled on a branch just a few trees away from their original target. Let's take that home for dinner. Eliana's stomach churned. I can't kill a squirrel. The stars gave us animals for food. Cyrus gestured toward Eliana's bag, which held the food Della had packed. It contained salted meat and brown bread, a combination Eliana had been eager to roast over a fire, but which now left her nauseous. But it's wrong to kill. She still argued, even though she was no longer sure if she should. Cyrus crossed his arms over his chest. If a man walks by and I shoot him, yes, it would be wrong to kill him. If he runs at us with an axe, bloodlust in his eyes, killing him would be the exact right thing to do. Eliana laughed. I don't think any squirrels are going to be galloping at us with weapons. True. Cyrus smiled, picking up his bow and arrow and anchoring his hand against his cheek. I'm just saying right and wrong lies more in our intentions. There's a difference between using a bow to hunt for sustenance and using a bow to kill without purpose. The bow itself is not evil. It can be used for good or evil by the person who wields it. It's a choice. He let the arrow fly, and it struck the squirrel through the eye, making Eliana wince. His words sank deep into her soul, digging at truths and lies she wasn't ready to dissect, and the rest of their time she was too distracted to hit a single tree. By the time they returned to the gate, it was almost the 11th bell. They passed through the gardens, the flowers all in a state of hesitation, nearly ready to bloom. She paused at the stargazer's threshold, scratching at the scars on her hands, never feeling worthy to enter the place of worship. Cyrus nudged her forward, forcing her in so he could follow. He scanned the other clergy, but his eyes lit up when they landed on Della, who stood precariously on a ladder where she replaced candles in windows in preparation for the nightly worshippers. We're back, Gams. He held up the strung meat as if offering his grandmother a bouquet instead of a squirrel's carcass. Della turned and smiled. How were archery lessons? She's a natural when she's focused. Eliana started at the compliment. Della climbed down the ladder, then brushed off her hands as she joined them in the middle of the room. The small dirt circle there was the center of a starburst of benches leading out to the edge of the room. Tonight, like every night, worshippers would gather and sit here, faces angled up to take in the star's beauty. I'm glad to hear it. I'm sure you'll sleep well for your rest time this afternoon. She took the squirrel from Cyrus. Oh, a new shipment came today, from Lumen Mountain's stargazer. Her face grew troubled even as Eliana's heart soared. Lumen Mountain? I thought they would never close. Cyrus elbowed Eliana. Celeste was just asking about the artifacts. She wants to see them. Eliana grimaced, both at the false name and the direct request. The two of you can sort them tomorrow. I'll have Bartholomew help. He can show you some of the older ones we're preparing to put on display. They're in the storage room. She gestured with the squirrel toward an oak door amidst the curved stone wall. It was one of the two locked doors Eliana hadn't been able to get past during her searches. Now, Della used her free hand to pull a key from her pocket, and Eliana's breath hitched. I hope to sleep late since I'm last to bed tonight, but the two of you can start early in the morning. She held the key out toward Cyrus. Eliana clenched her hands together to keep from snatching it. Cyrus held out his hands, smeared with squirrel blood. I cleaned them after I strung it up, but I tripped and nearly dropped it halfway back. I'd better wash up first. Della gave a small snort and turned to Eliana. Celeste, can you hold it for my uncoordinated grandson? He's likely to lose it before the sun's morn anyway. Eliana licked her lips, glancing at the key, then back to Cyrus and Della's faces. Was this a test? Or could it really be this easy? She slowly took the key, her fingers numb. Of course. Deep gongs sounded from the bell tower just north of the stargazer, drawing Eliana's attention to the emptiness of the room. Oh dear, Della said. Is it already that time? I'll take care of this. The two of you should head for your beds. Cyrus nodded, but Eliana hesitated, tucking the key in her pocket. Would it be all right if I took an extra hour to pray? She asked. I know the stars aren't out, but I find these quiet times without the crowds to be the most rewarding. Della beamed at her. That is a request I will always be willing to grant. Eliana could hardly believe her luck when the two left the stargazer and she shut the door behind them. Without wasting a moment, she rushed to the storage room, raising the key with trembling hands to fumble with the lock. As the door opened, wood scraped against the floor like a grindstone sharpening an axe. Eliana froze, straining her ears for anyone who might not be resting to come investigate. But then she caught sight of the artifacts, and her mouth swung open. The closet extended the length of her bed before wrapping around the curve of the wall like a corridor, farther than she could see. Shelves lined both walls, and a third set of shelves ran down the middle. Carefully placed holes in the outside wall let in enough light for her to see, but not enough for others to see in or even notice the miniature windows from the outside. At first, the collections looked erratic. Weapons next to robes and books next to jars, but they were all carefully labeled with the stargazer they'd come from and their estimated date of origin. Golden figurines were scattered throughout, some in the shape of 5-pointed stars, some resembling humans. She ran her hands over a stack of books that had come from Velspets, a tiny seaside town in the eastern province. If she closed her eyes, she could still smell the salt in the air, feel the thickness of it blowing across her neck. It had been her favorite of all the towns. The priestess had snuck her candy and shown her an alcove overlooking the sea where she could come and sit any time she liked. An entire bell passed before she got through a quarter of the shelves. She quickened her pace, not sure if she'd have the key tomorrow. The farther she walked back in the closet, the older and more decrepit the items got. Several books looked like they might crumble to dust if she touched them, and some metal objects were too rusted for her to define. The sun was nearly ready to sleep when she found a basket of trinkets labeled Starlocks in the back of the room. Her guardians had never specified the arrow's size. Maybe it was tiny. Eliana bent low to dig through them, but before she could look closer, her gaze landed on a golden shaft tucked back behind the basket. She gasped, moving the basket aside and rubbing dust off the arrow's label. There was no date, but the tag read, Golden Arrow of Lorvandus. Eliana's palms grew damp with sweat. She wiped them on her robes, then inched shaking hands toward the arrow. An inscription in the ancient tongue danced across its golden surface, the shaft as thick as her finger and half the length of her arm. She bent closer to make out the words. Cyrus had introduced her to the archaic symbols the other day, but they still looked indecipherable. The 13th bell rang. What are you doing? Eliana jumped at Cyrus's question, her head bumping into the shelf above her. She stood quickly, turning to face him as her cheeks grew warm. His brow bunched in uncertainty, or maybe hurt. and his gaze drifted between the shelf she'd abandoned and her empty hands. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I thought I'd get started on the artifacts that came in." He chewed on his lip, glancing back toward the main room. "The new artifacts are by the door." She squeaked out a laugh. I must have walked right past them. Then I got distracted by all the amazing things." She spun in a circle, like a child testing the flare of a new dress. "Well, no one's allowed to be in here by themselves, not even Gams or Gamps." "Of course," she said, nodding soberly. He turned and stepped away, trusting her to follow. She bent down and reached blindly for the arrow, begging the stars to keep him from turning around. Smooth, warm metal met her fingers, and as she tightened her hold on the arrow, it thrummed with energy. Chapter 7. Aura's eyes flew open, even though she'd just lain down to rest. The blonde braid tied around her wrist warmed against her skin, its touch like the vibration of a cat's purr. She sat up straight, nearly falling from the crudely hung hammock. Her bare feet sought the rough edges of the rotting deck of Garen's hideout, even though her shock made it impossible to stand. She'd been squatting there for the last week, searching through his books and keeping track of his plans, but she hadn't expected this. She grasped the braid, using the energy flowing through her blood to reach out beyond the mangrove trees, into the night air, past the deep waters under the dancing stars, even beyond the barrier. Reaching for the long-lost peace that called out to her, that spoke to her. Its signal grew stronger, closer, the woman grasping it, acting as a conduit. Aura grew blind to the mangrove forest, lost awareness of her own slight frame and slender limbs. The eyes of her mind sought someone new, someone powerful, someone who might be able to help her, someone who'd touched the arrow. Chapter 8. Eliana couldn't help the whimper that escaped her lips. When Cyrus turned, it was impossible for her to hide her bent posture, the arrow in her hands. She clung to it like a lifeline, even as she feared the power feeding it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" His eyes dropped to her hand, to the flash of gold. His brow furrowed, then understanding dawned. "Are you stealing from the Stargazer?" The accusation stung, even though her true purpose wasn't any more noble. She waited for its power to work, for the arrow to remove her from this place, from Cyrus's disappointment, which was far worse than anger. When nothing happened, she ran, pushing past Cyrus and out to the Stargazer's atrium. By now, the other priests and priestesses had risen, gathering in the Stargazer for a group prayer before dinner. She skidded to a stop, unable to control her gasping breath or darting eyes. The only door out was blocked by Della. The stars were just beginning to be visible through the open roof, witnesses to her downfall. Whether the servants of the stars meant to help or stop her, they all took a step closer, hedging her in. The buildup of energy in her blood left her taut, like a bowstring pulled to its maximum tension. The only way to let the arrow fly would be to release her blood, to release uncontrolled magic. Even though it would draw in the dark spirits, the temptation was strong. But without knowing how to use it, she'd be more likely to kill them all than to escape with the arrow. "Please," she murmured, grasping the arrow tighter in both hands, her palms growing numb from its vibration. "Wait." Della's voice rang out through the room, drawing everyone's eyes to where she stood, hand raised. Eliana's gaze flicked toward the door behind her. Della took a few steps forward, squinting closer at Eliana, completely ignoring the humming arrow in her hands. "Eliana?" she whispered. Eliana went still. "How do you know my name?" "Raildan, your father. He asked me to guard the arrow for him, to hold it until he, or you, came back for it." Eliana straightened. "I have no father." Still, her pulse raced a little faster at the mention of family, the impossible thing she'd never let herself want. Della hesitated. "Something got lost over the years, didn't it? Either your father or your memory. Maybe you." She scanned Eliana's face, her eyes troubled, but Eliana shook away the hope rising in her chest. "Then you'll let me leave?" Eliana asked. Tears welled up in Della's eyes. "It would be an honor to watch you use the Starbridge." Gasps spread through the room, followed by murmurs. "Celeste?" She turned to see Cyrus's face pink and blotchy, his eyes darting between her and Della. She opened her mouth, unsure which lie to tell. Would he hate her less if he discovered she wasn't stealing? Or would he despise her more for keeping her secrets? The arrow's hum deepened until it was audible, the glitter of its edges shifting to a glow that slowly grew to fill the room. It seemed to sense her power, absorbing it for its own use. Eliana froze, her mind screaming that she should drop it, but her body was unwilling to obey the command. The priests and priestesses around them gasped. Several ran from the room, tripping over each other in their panic. The light became blinding, and Eliana threw an arm over her eyes to block it out, too disoriented to even use the distraction to run for the door. When the light receded, the atrium still shone as if the sun's light filled the room. The handful of servants of the stars remaining all bowed before a figure now standing with Eliana. The woman's short dark hair swung across her face, framing her round cheeks. One moment she looked as old as Arvid and Vera, another as young as Eliana, but her dark eyes held an ageless quality, like they'd seen 1,000 lifetimes. The transparency of her slim form made it difficult to determine the shade of her skin, and the details of her appendages grew fainter the farther out they were from her core, making her clothing and figure unidentifiable. She tilted her head, taking in Eliana for a mere moment before eyeing the golden arrow. Her eyes slid shut, her lips moving with words Eliana couldn't make out. "Who are you?" Eliana's fingers trembled as she shielded herself, as if the woman might lash out. The woman ignored her question, inching forward, hand stretched out toward the arrow. "Do you know what you hold?" Instinctively, Eliana pulled it closer to her chest. I thought it was a starbridge." She glanced down at the arrow, which still hummed in her hand. "Instead, it brought you?" The woman hummed non-committally. "Perhaps it's a starbridge, or perhaps it's so much more." "That light," Eliana murmured, noticing the way it blotted out her view of the stars. "My guardians will see it. You all need to run." Her voice rose to hysteria, inducing panic that sent the last of the servants of the stars from the room, save Della and Cyrus. She reached out a hand for Della's robes, clenching the fabric in her fist to pull the priestess toward the door. Now that the moment had come, she couldn't leave them. Not like this. They'll destroy everything in their path to reach the arrow. Della's face paled, but her voice remained calm. Then you must use it. Now. Aeliana gaped at Della. And leave you at their mercy? The old woman's eyes were clear, with a defiant confidence. Your father left it for you for a reason, for a greater purpose. That same hope unfurled in Aeliana's chest, but it was too complicated to grow. The stars will protect us. Della stood a hair straighter. Or they will honor us in the next life for our sacrifice. The strange woman shifted, her eyes alighting with interest. Yes, use it to take yourself back home. Back? Cyrus asked, wedging himself between the woman and Aeliana like a shield. Back to Vendaris? The woman raised a brow at him, her form flickering. Loyalty is an admirable form of faithfulness. Cyrus seemed to grow several inches at her words. Does that mean she's a half-light? He turned to Aeliana, as if seeing her for the first time. His words left her exposed. She didn't want him studying her in this way, any more than she wanted Arvid and Vera using her blood for their purposes. She craved invisibility, anonymity, even more now that a label had been put on her strangeness for all to see. She needed to be among other half-lights, where she could blend in. She needed people who could show her how to tamp down the power in her blood and live like a human. Read the words, Aeliana, Della urged, gesturing at the inscription on the arrow. I don't even know what they say. Aeliana frowned down at its shaft. The strange woman hummed, as if they had all the time in the world. They go back to a time before the Great Divide. A time before half-lights and humans. In today's language, it would be something like divided in war, united in hope, reconciled in love. Or maybe separated by strife, merged by faith, restored by sacrifice. Nothing is ever just one thing. Her eyes closed, and the foreign words slipped across her lips like water on river rocks. The temptation to repeat them was strong. It was what Aeliana wanted on so many levels, but that was also how magic felt. Something she wanted to use, even though she knew it was wrong. She could practically taste the acrid stench of her plans going up in flames around her. There was only one solution she could consider. She had to wait for Arvid and Vera and take them across the barrier. It was the only way to protect these people who had welcomed her into their home and, if Della's story could be trusted, had guarded a relic for her for over a dozen years. With the resignation came relief. Finally, she was doing something to save lives instead of take them. Hand it over, Aeliana. Aeliana cringed as the familiar, deep voice rang out from the back of the atrium. Arvid shuffled through the door, squinting in the apparition's bright light. Vera followed, and the servants of the stars who had fled peeked in through the door behind them. There were still too many people here who could get hurt. Come, let's use it together. Aeliana held the golden arrow out with a shaking hand toward her guardians. It was all the invitation they needed. As they stepped forward, several priests and priestesses snuck into the room, eager to watch history be made. "Don't do it," Cyrus said. "I have to go." Eliana pressed her lips together. "Then you go alone," Della said. "Your father made no mention of these two." Vera laughed, edging her way to Eliana's side. "Her father? You mean the thief who stole the Star Bridge? We brought her to Lorvandis for her protection." "You brought her here?" The suspicion coloring Della's tone matched Eliana's own doubt. "She was a helpless baby." Vera turned beady eyes toward Eliana. "There was talk of killing you because of some curse or prophecy. We brought you here to save you." Eliana held back a snort. Maybe some of that was true, but definitely not all of it. "What about you?" Della rose as she spoke, her voice ringing through the now nearly full room. She gave a respectful incline of her head toward the strange woman, keeping her eyes lowered as she directly addressed her. "What do you have to do with all this?" "More than even I realized." The woman's eyes narrowed in consideration as she took in Arvid and Vera's proximity to Eliana and the arrow. "I'm here to make sure Eliana crosses the barrier." "Who are you?" Cyrus dared to repeat Eliana's question. "You may call me Aura." She gave a serene smile, but offered nothing more. "I know what you are." Arvid waved a hand through her form, the vague parts of her disintegrating before reforming, like a cloud trying to retain its shape. "You can't do anything to us. You're not even here." His taunts only made the woman calmer, quieter. "Perhaps not." She turned to Eliana. "But you can." Eliana hesitated before turning to her guardians, tucking the arrow in against her chest. "Why do you want to go back?" She'd never asked them, but suddenly it mattered. Did they have far worse things planned for Vindaris? "You think you can cross on your own?" Vera's laugh grated on Eliana's nerves. "What will you do when you get there? You'll either bleed to death or summon the dark spirits, and then who knows what kind of havoc you'll wreak." Her words stirred up a different fear in Eliana. Fear that she could never be free of her guardians, not even in Vindaris. Her magic could be monstrous, but at least her guardians managed it enough to keep her from unleashing its full power. "Don't go with them," Cyrus pleaded. Everyone assumed the choice was up to her, but she had no choice. If she didn't bring them, it would be Cyrus and his family who had to pay. Della stood tall, gently pulling Eliana away from Arvid and Vera. "The decision isn't up to you or Eliana. She has made a commitment to the stars and is under my care as a priestess in training. Her training will best be completed if she travels to Vindaris alone. I'm sending her as an ambassador from the people of Lorvandis. May her path bring glory to the stars." Cyrus inched to his left, ignorantly stepping in front of Eliana, as if his mortal body could defend whatever onslaught her guardians might bring. Tears pricked at the back of Eliana's eyes at Della's words and Cyrus's tangible show of support. Della didn't know what she was saying. She didn't really understand what Eliana was, what terrible things her blood could do. But her words held a depth of love Eliana had never experienced before. She wished it was enough to keep them all safe. Before she could turn down the offer that had been more of a command, Arvid shoved Cyrus to the ground, then yanked Aeliana closer. He nearly pulled her shoulder out of its socket as Vera tugged on her sleeve and sliced Aeliana's free hand without ceremony. More cries echoed around them as the servants of the stars once again scattered. Aeliana winced, but as the blood pooled out, she sighed, the relief overpowering all her fear and concern. The tightness of her skin and muscles slowly abated, as if the pressure her blood had been building was released like with an opened valve. She tried to tamp down the euphoria that built in its place, horrified as always as the relief grew to satisfaction. She didn't want this, and yet it was exactly what she wanted. Arvid cupped his hands under hers as Vera squeezed. Aeliana blinked, dimly aware that Arvid lost more blood to the floor than he gained, but their sloppy efforts were an act of desperation and impatience, not calculated precision. Arvid had no interest in being careful as he turned to the boy curled up on the floor. Arvid's eyes rolled back in his head as the energy of her blood seeped through his skin. Aeliana snatched her hand back from Vera's grip to tug on Arvid's wrist and draw his attention back to her. "I'm going with you." Her words spilled out in a slurred rush. "Take me to Vindaris without harming him, and I'll do whatever you want, please." His lips curled in a snarl, and Aeliana knew she'd lost. He'd already tipped over the line of sanity. Aeliana launched herself on top of Cyrus, lying face down and spreading out as far as possible, bracing herself for the pain that was sure to come. Instead, she heard a high-pitched scream that cut off abruptly. She turned back to find Arvid's bloody hand grasping Della's throat, her eyes bulging as she clawed at his grip. The sight was sobering, pulling Aeliana from the drunken stupor of her blood being spilled. "Gams!" Cyrus pushed Aeliana aside so he could rise, but Aeliana pulled him back down. He would only get Della and himself killed. Even if the handful of remaining people all worked together, they couldn't stand against Arvid using her blood. "Let me help her," Cyrus ground out. Aeliana latched onto his legs, nearly dropping the arrow, then turned to Aura. "Please, stop this." Aura's eyes grew troubled, the crease returning to her brow. "Even if I could, interfering is not my way." If the woman had been solid, Aeliana might have slapped her. As it was, it took all her effort to hold Cyrus back, and still he was making ground, dragging her across the dirt with him. "Arvid!" Aeliana called, her voice hoarse as fear crawled up her throat. "Leave Della alone. She's a simple priestess who can't harm you. She can't enforce the authority she claims. It's me you want. Take me with you to Vindaris and be done with this part of the world. Killing her won't gain you anything." She held up the golden arrow, now splattered by her own blood, fearing how close the dark spirits might be, how eager Arvid would be to let them fuse with his soul. Cyrus broke free from her grip, but before he could reach Della, Vera's hand snaked out around his upper arm. "That's where you're wrong." Vera's other hand reached for the arrow. "You need a reminder of what we're willing to do." Arvid released his grip, and Della fell to her knees, gasping in air and rubbing her neck. She looked old and frail, nothing like the strong priestess Aeliana knew. But then Della's gaze landed on Cyrus, her focus intensifying until it seemed Cyrus would combust. "Protect her," Della rasped out. "Don't let—" Her words cut off with gasps as Arvid smeared Aeliana's blood down the front of Della's robes. his touch almost gentle as her body convulsed with pain. Her gasps turned to cries as her body flopped to the ground and fresh blood seeped through her robes. This time, the blood wasn't Eliana's. "Gams!" Cyrus called again, but Vera's grip was like iron on both his arm and Eliana's golden arrow. Aura might have whispered an apology, but her words were lost to Della's sobs echoing off the atrium walls. Without another glance, Arvid reached for the arrow. His massive hands enveloped Eliana's and Vera's as he uttered the foreign words barely visible beneath the blood. The brightness of the stargazer engulfed them, the walls closing in like a vice that squeezed the breath out of Eliana before everything went black. I hope you enjoyed listening to this first installment of Blood of the Stars by Karyne Norton. To get reminders for new episodes and to stay up to date with my books, be sure to sign up for my newsletter at KarynNorton.com. You'll also get the prequel short story to Blood of the Stars in ebook and audio for free. Thanks so much for listening.